Welcome to Pamoja Podcast, a ministry of Life of Christ International Ministries, the place where stronger lives are built, faith is strengthened, hearts are encouraged, and Christ-centered homes are shaped through ordinary conversations that become extraordinary encounters with God's truth. One conversation, one story, one revelation at a time. As I have reflected on my father's story over the years, I have come to appreciate something I completely overlooked when I first heard it. He didn't simply tell me there were windows. He told me they were sealed. At first, I thought the windows were simply there to keep the cold air out. But now I realize they were there to protect something far more valuable: the atmosphere. Everything inside that house depended on the atmosphere remaining the same. Warmth, peace, rest, safety, joy. The fire could continue burning, but if enough cold air entered, the entire atmosphere would change. And isn't that exactly what happens in many marriages? The love may still be there, the covenant may still exist, the family may still live under the same roof, yet somehow the atmosphere changes. The laughter becomes silence, patience becomes irritation, kindness becomes criticism, conversation becomes obligation. The house is still standing, but it no longer feels like home. So today, I want us to walk slowly around that house again, not to inspect the walls, not to inspect the roof, but to inspect the windows, because every window represents something we allow to enter our lives, and every window deserves to be guarded. The first window is the window of words. If I were to ask you today, what creates the atmosphere inside your home? Many people would answer, our finances, our schedules, our children, our responsibilities. Those things certainly influence a home, but Scripture points us somewhere much deeper. It points us to our words. Listen to what Solomon says in Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Think about that for a moment. Death and life are carried by the same instrument, the tongue. The words spoken inside your house are never neutral. They are constantly planting something. Every conversation plants a seed. Every compliment plants a seed. Every criticism plants a seed. Every encouragement plants a seed. Every insult plants a seed. And every seed will eventually produce a harvest. Perhaps this is why James devoted an entire chapter to the tongue. He compares it to the rudder of a ship, a tiny spark that sets an entire forest on fire. A small bit placed in the mouth of a horse, something very small, with enormous consequences. James isn't exaggerating. He's describing what every married couple eventually experiences. Sometimes, one sentence spoken in anger remains in the heart for years, not because it was loud, but because words have remarkable power. Words shape identity. Words shape memory. Words shape atmosphere. I have learned that people rarely remember every conversation they have with their spouse, but they almost always remember the words that deeply wounded them or deeply encouraged them. How many husbands still remember hearing, "I'm proud of you"? How many wives still remember hearing, "I appreciate everything you do"? And sadly, how many still carry words that should never have been spoken? Words like, "You'll never change," "You always fail," "I regret marrying you," "I don't respect you." Those words don't disappear when the conversation ends. They remain inside the house, like our traveler from the previous conversation. The voice stays. Paul understood this. That's why he writes in Ephesians 4:29, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Notice what Paul is teaching. Before a word leaves your mouth, it should pass through a question. Will this build or will it destroy? Will this heal or will it wound? Will this strengthen my home or weaken its atmosphere? Imagine how many marriages would change if every husband and every wife asked that question before speaking. One of my favorite examples in Scripture is Barnabas. His name literally means son of encouragement. Think about that. His identity became connected to the words he consistently spoke. When everyone doubted Saul, Barnabas believed in him. When John Mark failed, Barnabas gave him another opportunity. He became known not for criticism, but for encouragement. Imagine if every husband decided, I will become the Barnabas of my wife. Imagine if every wife decided, I will become the Barnabas of my husband. Homes would begin changing immediately because encouragement changes atmosphere. But the house still has more windows. As we continue walking through this house in the middle of the forest, we leave the window of words behind, and we arrive at another window, a quieter one, a more subtle one that rarely announces its arrival. We've guarded our words, yet another window quietly waits for us, one that has stolen the joy of countless marriages, broken families, and even faithful believers. It is a window that existed long before social media, long before television, long before the world we know today. Unlike the first window, this one doesn't usually enter through the mouth. It enters through the eyes. It begins with what we see, then grows into what we desire. It whispers, what God has given you isn't enough. It whispers, someone else's life is better. Someone else's marriage is happier. Someone else's children are doing better. Someone else's ministry is growing faster. Someone else's calling is greater. Little by little, comparison replaces gratitude. Contentment gives way to dissatisfaction, and before long, the atmosphere inside the house begins to change. So let's continue our walk around the house. Let's open the scriptures together and examine the second window, the window of comparison. Because the first comparison did not begin on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. It began in a garden, the Garden of Eden, and the strategy of the serpent hasn't changed since. And that is exactly where the serpent began. Not with force, not with temptation, not even with the forbidden fruit. He began with comparison. Listen carefully to the conversation recorded in Genesis chapter 3. Did God really say? Then, only a few moments later, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God. Do you hear what the serpent is really saying? What God has already given you isn't enough. There is something better. There is another life waiting for you. God is withholding something from you. In other words, he opened a window, not in the garden, in Eve's heart. Before Eve ever reached for the fruit, she first reached for an idea. The fall did not begin with eating. It began with believing. That is how the enemy still works today. He rarely begins with the visible sin. He begins with an invisible thought, a comparison, a suggestion, a dissatisfaction, because every visible fall is first conceived in the invisible world of the heart. James explains this with remarkable clarity. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. James 1:14-15. Did you notice the progression? Suggestion, desire, sin, death. Satan understands something many believers overlook. He knows he doesn't have to convince you to sin today. He simply has to plant a thought today that will produce a harvest tomorrow. That is why comparison is so dangerous. Comparison is rarely the destination. It is the doorway. It opens the heart to desires that never existed before. Think about Eve for a moment. She was already walking with God, already living in abundance, already surrounded by beauty, already created in God's image, already entrusted with dominion. She lacked nothing. Yet after one conversation with the serpent, abundance suddenly felt like deprivation. One forbidden tree became more attractive than every tree God had already given her. Isn't that exactly what comparison still does? It has an amazing ability to make us overlook 99 blessings while becoming consumed by the one thing we don't have. It quietly shifts our eyes from God's provision to God's prohibition, from gratitude to entitlement, from worship to dissatisfaction. And once gratitude leaves the house, the atmosphere begins to change. As we continue walking around this house, we come to another window, one that many people leave wide open without ever realizing it. Unlike the window of words or the window of comparison, this one doesn't always feel dangerous. Sometimes it feels comforting. Sometimes it feels helpful. Sometimes it even sounds wise. Because this window doesn't usually open for strangers. It opens for voices, the window of influence. Every house has an atmosphere, but every atmosphere has influences. No atmosphere remains unchanged. Someone or something is always shaping it. The question is not whether you are being influenced. The question is, who are you allowing to influence you? Because every voice carries a direction. Every conversation leaves an impression. Every relationship plants something. Every book, every movie, every podcast, every social media account, every friendship, every counselor, every coworker, every mentor, every family member leaves something behind. The question is, what are they leaving behind? Are they strengthening your covenant or slowly pulling you away from it? The scriptures speak often about influence because God understands something we sometimes forget. No one walks alone. We all become, little by little, like the voices we repeatedly welcome into our lives. Listen to the wisdom of Proverbs 13:20. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Notice what Solomon doesn't say. He doesn't say, try harder. He doesn't say, be smarter. He says, walk with the wise, because wisdom is contagious, but so is foolishness. Character is formed in company. Atmosphere is created by association. The people you consistently listen to will eventually shape the person you become. Paul says the very same thing in 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. That verse has often been used to warn young people about choosing friends wisely, and it certainly applies. But I believe the principle is much broader. Paul is teaching us that influence is never neutral. Character is either being built or slowly eroded. Think about that. He doesn't say, bad company destroys character overnight. He says, it corrupts. That word describes something gradual, almost unnoticed, like rust slowly covering steel, like termites quietly weakening a house, like a window left open, allowing cold air to enter one gentle breeze at a time. The Bible gives us remarkable examples. Consider Rehoboam. When Solomon died, The kingdom stood at a crossroads. The elders gave wise counsel. They urged the young king to serve the people with humility. Then Rehoboam did something that changed history. He walked away from the elders and sought advice from the young men who had grown up with him. They told him, "Be harsher, be stronger, show them who's in charge." He listened. The result: the kingdom was divided. One decision, one influence, one voice, an entire nation changed. Never underestimate the power of the voices you choose to trust. We see the same pattern much earlier in the garden. The serpent didn't force Eve to eat. He simply offered another voice. Until that moment, God's voice had been enough. Then another voice entered the conversation. Every temptation begins with competing voices. One voice says, "Trust God." The other says, "You deserve more." One says, "Wait." The other says, "Take it now." One says, "Forgive." The other says, "Protect your pride." One says, "Honor your covenant." The other says, "You'd be happier somewhere else." Every day, those voices compete for the atmosphere of our homes. The question is, which voice have we been listening to? Jesus said something that has always captured my heart. "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." John 10:27. Notice what he did not say. "My sheep hear every voice." He said, "They know my voice." There is a difference. Spiritual maturity is not learning to hear more voices. It is learning to recognize the shepherd's voice above every other voice. The closer you walk with Christ, the easier it becomes to recognize what does not sound like him. Because not every good idea is God's idea. Not every popular opinion is biblical truth. Not every encouraging voice is leading you toward Christ. Discernment is one of the greatest gifts God gives to those who walk closely with him. As we leave this window behind, I want you to ask yourself one simple question. Who has access to the atmosphere of my house? Who has permission to shape the way I think about my spouse, my children, my calling, my future, and even my relationship with God? Because whatever voice repeatedly enters through this window will eventually echo inside your own heart. But the house still has another window. This one may be the most dangerous of them all, because unlike the others, it doesn't invite something into the house. It hides something inside the house. Let's continue our walk together. As we close today's conversation, our walk around the house is far from over. There are still windows we have yet to examine, windows that have quietly threatened not only marriages, but families, ministries, callings, and entire generations. In our next conversation, we will continue exploring these subtle yet incredibly dangerous windows that have silently destroyed homes and marriages for centuries. But let me leave you with one final thought. The consequences of an open window extend far beyond the walls of your own house. They reach your children. They shape your grandchildren. They influence generations that have not yet been born. They affect your church, your community, your ministry, your witness, your legacy, because every marriage is preaching a message, every family is leaving an inheritance, and every life is influencing someone, whether we realize it or not. That is why the enemy fights so relentlessly against God's design for marriage and the family. He understands something many people fail to see. It has never been only about you. If he can weaken a husband, he may discourage a wife. If he can discourage a wife, he may confuse the children. If he can confuse the children, he may alter the course of generations. If he can destroy one home, He may silence a testimony that God intended to reach hundreds, perhaps thousands. One broken covenant can echo through generations, but one faithful covenant can bless generations as well. Scripture reminds us that God shows steadfast love to thousands of generations of those who love Him and keep His commandments. Never underestimate the power of a home surrendered to God. Your obedience today may become someone else's inheritance tomorrow. Your faithfulness may become your children's foundation. Your prayers may become your grandchildren's testimony, and your marriage may become the example that gives another couple the courage to keep fighting for theirs. So don't guard your house only for yourselves. Guard it for those who are watching. Guard it for those who are following. Guard it for those who will one day bear your name. And above all, guard it for the glory of Christ, because from the very beginning, it has never been only about you. It has always been about God's kingdom being revealed through your home. Until next time, may the Lord bless your home, strengthen your covenant, protect every window, and fill your house with His presence.